I think that he's got all the traits to develop into one of the better tight ends in the NFL. You can line him up in multiple locations within the offensive formation. I think he'll probably begin his career playing closer to the formation as opposed to being split and detached.
You're tuned in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, guiding your gridiron journey, none other than your host, former NFL lineman, Ross Tucker.
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. It is a Monster Monday, presented, of course, as always, by DraftKings. The crown is yours. I'm Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman. Long time ago now at this point. However, stayed close to the game, calling college NFL games for CBS, NFL games on the radio for Westwood One. I do the Eagles preseason as well. And we've got one of the best podcasts around, a whole network, in fact. We'll do the College Draft podcast today with Emory Hunt, where we will talk about the D-line. It is a loaded D-line class in the NFL this year. In fact, that's probably what we will talk about next week with the great Greg Cosell, who joins us on a surprise Monday appearance. We'll get to Greg momentarily. We're running out of weeks here, by the way, before the NFL draft, so we're going to double dip with Greg today with the tight ends and the O-line. Make sure you are following us on social media. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. We are at Ross Tucker Pod. Usually that's the best way to know when the shows have been posted. Of course, we'll take our first crack at the season win totals with Steve Fezzik on tomorrow's Even Money Betting Podcast. Love everybody that watches us on YouTube now, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. That is always very, very cool. And remember, if you take advantage of any of our sponsors or you spread the word via social media, rate and review the show, email me, ross@rosstucker.com. I love sending you guys signed stuff in the mail. Absolutely, especially these press passes from the playoff games this past year. It is awesome, almost as awesome as Greg Cosell. It's Big Show time.
The Big Show.
Okay, Greg, we'll talk O-line in a little bit. We got to double up. Next week we'll do D-line and maybe linebackers. I don't know. We got to figure this out, man. We're running out of episodes.
I know. We're getting too close.
Draft.
I got too many guys I still got to watch. We're getting too close.
I know. But listen, let's go tight ends to start because that's probably more interesting for most people than the offensive linemen. But we'll talk tight ends. And as I like to do, Greg, is there a guy that jumped out? He doesn't necessarily mean he's your number one guy or whatever, but was there a guy that really stood out to you watching this group of tight ends?
Well, we know about the main guys, and we can certainly get to them, and I think for most it's Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland. But one guy that really stood out to me was Elijah Arroyo from Miami. You're dealing with a guy that's over 6'5", 250. He really only played one full season at Miami because he battled injuries in 2022 and 2023. And I'm sure the medical reports, the lack of experience, you know how scouts are and coaches. But, I mean, this guy is a higher level receiving tight end. He's really smooth and fluid. He's got soft hands. He's got a really wide catching radius. He's got pretty long arms for a tight end. You can line him up anywhere in the formation, including snaps at boundary X. And he was used in motion a lot. I mean, some will say he's a little high cut. But he has vertical ability. And I think that's one thing that a lot of teams look for now in tight ends is vertical ability. So he can be a 3-level dimension in your offense.
So, okay, two things we got to follow up on because at least half the audience is now saying, what does high cut mean and why does that matter?
Yeah, I mean, high cut means, when I see a guy that's high cut, I think of a guy that has like longer legs and therefore it takes him a little longer to change direction and transition, because he's not built low to the ground. He's built higher up with longer legs. So you see that with corners at times as well who are tall. They just don't transition quite as smoothly as shorter guys because they're not built as low to the ground. And then one thing I will say about Arroyo, and a lot of people might be listening right now and thinking, well, he's a receiver. he was deployed in the Miami run game primarily on the edges, but he was also used as a drive and base blocker. He was constantly deployed in their zone run game as what we call a split flow blocker, where he works across the formation. You know what I'm talking about, Ross, but for the audience, where he works across the formation and seals the backside in the zone run game. So it's not as if he was just a detached player who was not involved at all as a blocker in the run game.
It's a good point. And I want to just clarify too, Greg. You know, when you talk about getting vertical, right? You're either a tight end that can run down the seam and really scare, the second level defender, the linebacker, if it's zone coverage, or if it's, man coverage and it's a safety. There are some tight ends that are true down the seam guys that are a real threat to have a big game. And there's other guys that's just not really who they are.
Right. Well, this guy can get down the seam. He can run. So he intrigued me. And like I said, the 1 year, scouts and coaches look at that and they're uncertain. But the traits are there.
What about Greg Tyler Warren from Penn State? I remember watching his junior year high school video when he was playing quarterback. It was so fun to watch. He had one of the coolest seasons I've ever seen by a college tight end this year.
Yeah, it's funny because I watched him last summer from his 2023 tape, and I actually thought that he was the best tight end on their team, because you might recall that Theo Johnson came out and he was a draft choice. But he's a really good receiver. Now, you might not say he's explosive. Like, I think Arroyo is a little more straight line explosive, but this guy is clearly, Warren we're talking about now, clearly a mismatch versus both linebackers and safeties. And much like George Kittle is deployed with the 49ers. Now, at this point in his development, you're uncertain as to his ability to separate versus man, because you didn't see that very often. But he's really physical. He's got great hands. He can make tough contested catches where contact did not bother him at all. And I think that he's got all the traits to develop into one of the better tight ends in the NFL. You can line him up in multiple locations within the offensive formation. I think he'll probably begin his career playing closer to the formation as opposed to being split and detached. But I think that he really has a chance to develop into a complete tight end and be one of the better tight ends in the league.
He's a big kid too, and he's for a guy that was a high school quarterback.
Yep.
I'm not going to say he's a dominant blocker, but he's not afraid to get after people. That's for sure.
No. Your point's correct. I mean, he the willingness, the competitiveness. I mean, he can execute when he's both attached and detached. I mean, and they used him with multiple blocking concepts. I mean, they had a really good run game. They have two really good backs who decided to come back in Singleton and Allen. But, I mean, you saw him as the wrapper and gap scheme. You saw him as a drive blocker in zone schemes. It wasn't as if he was not asked to block. He was asked to block, and he was competitive.
Greg, what about Colston Loveland from Michigan?
Yeah, Loveland is one of those guys, when you watch, he just looks so smooth. Now, again, he's asked to block too, and he gave excellent effort, because at Michigan you've got to block because they're a running football team. But you're dealing with a guy that is, he's just an athlete. I mean, he has the size, length, quickness, flexibility, speed profile that clearly presents as a tight end one. He can line up anywhere. I mean, this guy has a really streamlined frame. He looks effortless when he moves. Obviously, their quarterback situation in 2024 was not great. He still put up, pretty good numbers. He put up, better yards per catch a year ago when J.J. McCarthy was there. But you're dealing with a guy that just looks incredibly smooth. He's one of those classic tight ends, Ross, that when you look at him, he looks like a big wide receiver. He's really fluid. He's smooth. I mean, he's got that size, speed, stride length profile. He's got vertical ability. He's a really interesting guy.
So it's interesting, Greg. I'm curious to get your perspective on this. I saw Daniel Jeremiah said that he feels like there's almost two different categories of tight ends in the sense that there are guys that are really smooth route runners, like a Travis Kelsey, and he put Loveland in that category.
Yeah.
And then there are other guys that are more, you throw it to them when they're on the move and they're run and catch guys like a Gronkowski, and he put Tyler Warren in that category. In other words, maybe Gronkowski couldn't run some of the routes or run them as smoothly as Kelsey could, but Gronkowski was a different type of player because of his physicality when you got him on the move. And he kind of put Warren, he's not saying Warren is Gronk, but put him in more that category.
I would agree. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, that's why I mentioned with Warren that I think he's a little bit more of an attached player to start. And obviously we know Gronkowski, as his career progressed, did line up anywhere, and he could win on the outside. I remember he caught a touchdown in one Super Bowl where he split out to the right, and he beat the linebacker KJ Wright for a touchdown. I think Warren can certainly do that. I think Warren and Loveland they're just different body types and different in the way they move. And that's fine. I mean, you have different guys who are really good, in the league at the same position. But, I think we all look at tight ends depending on how they play and what they look like in different categories. And I would say Warren and Loveland are different, but both could be really, really good players.
Before we get to the O-line, the last tight end I wanted to ask you about, because I know his dad and used to work with his dad on TV, is Mason Taylor, the son of Jason Taylor,
Sure.
the tight end from LSU.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more to his game than what showed up on tape, because he wasn't really used, to me, in a way that was, conducive to what his traits are. I mean, he was really almost exclusively deployed as a short receiver working under 10 yards from the line of scrimmage in the LSU offense. He ran shallow crossers, he ran flat routes, a lot of routes where he started behind the line of scrimmage and then ran into the flat. So he wasn't asked to do a lot, but I think he's really athletic. I think you have to think about what he could become in the NFL, because he's got really natural movement traits. He's got really good receiving ability. There were a few times you saw him run the vertical seam, and he did that. I mean, he's a very easy mover. He just wasn't really deployed that way in the LSU offense, which, again, I'm not going to comment on that. I have no idea. But I just think there's much more to his game than what we saw in college. I mean, he is smooth, he's fluid, he's a natural mover. He's got good size, he catches the football. I think he had a really good sense, Ross, of pace and tempo with routes. He never seemed like he was hurried or fast in his movements. So to me, he's sort of the wild card for me here. And I know that he's high on a lot of people's lists, so it's not as if, people don't understand what he is. But I think he could become a really, really good NFL player.
Awesome. What about on the offensive side of the ball, on the offensive line, Greg? Speaking of LSU, I won't steer you that direction, because I'd like to first ask you if there's an offensive tackle that really stood out to you as a guy that you thought, wow, this guy is really the top guy, or really impressed me.
God, that's a hard question, right off the bat, because I've seen so many of these guys, and I'm,
Well, the answer's no. The answer's no.
Yeah.
If there isn't one guy that certainly jumped out to you.
I thought, and he got hurt, I thought Josh Simmons was a fascinating guy because he's so athletic, but he's physical as well. But you don't see that kind of athletic movement too often from a left tackle. And I'm not just talking about pass protection. We see a lot of guys in pass protection that clearly have, smooth kick slides, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. They look good in pass pro with their kick slides. But this guy, he showed outstanding athleticism, quick, light feet, easy movement. And it really showed up as a run blocker, both pulling inside and outside, climbing to the second level. That's where you often see that unbelievable movement is when these guys are asked to work up to the second level and they have to block, athletes, linebackers, sometimes safeties. So he was a fascinating guy, and of course he got hurt, so he only played 5 or 6 games. I know he got hurt in the Oregon game. I can't remember what week that was.
It's interesting. I did a couple of his games when he was at San Diego State, Greg.
Yep.
And he was like a freshman, 6'6", 315, looked awesome, was playing well. And I guess this is just the way college football is now, Greg, but my initial reaction was, how did he get to San Diego State? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
How did he get here? I was impressed that a guy that looked like Josh Simmons was playing left tackle for San Diego State. I did want to get your thoughts on Will Campbell. I mean, to start first game as a true freshman at LSU at left tackle is super impressive to me. Your thoughts on Will Campbell? He's been a very heavily debated player.
Yeah, and again, I would almost defer to you to some degree. I mean, that arm length conversation, by the way, it's real. You talk to offensive line coaches, it may be for fans. And Will Campbell, I watched him talk at the combine at the podium. Super impressive kid. He addressed the issue. His arm length, I guess at his pro day reached 33 inches, but at the combine, it was 32 and 5/8. And there are definitely O-line coaches. I mean, I've spoken to some. I haven't gotten a chance yet this year because I'm still grinding away, so I will at some point. But Ross, as you know, there are some offensive line coaches who believe that 33 inches is the demarcation point, and that if you're under 33 inches for a tackle position in the NFL, that doesn't work, and that you have to move inside to guard. Now, Campbell, I've watched a ton of Campbell. I mean, I've seen a lot of tape on Campbell, and for the most part, he is really, really good. I mean, there's not a lot of negative things to say about the way in which he plays. I mean, he's very controlled. He's very composed in pass protection, which is the main issue with the arm length. He's got great balance, great body control. He uses his hands really, really well to gain the leverage advantage. His anchor is phenomenal. I mean, he just shuts down power with strong hands. He's really sturdy. But there's always a few plays. And Landon Jackson from Arkansas, who I think is a really good prospect, he got him a couple times with arm length where he just had the first meaningful contact, and you could see that Campbell's arms weren't quite long enough to prevent that. So it's a fascinating question. His tape as a whole is really, really good, and it's so consistent. But there's just a few plays that make you think, okay, is the arm length an issue? I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not really the guy to make that call. You probably would have a better idea. Offensive line coaches obviously have their thoughts. But the guy's been a 3-year starter in the SEC, and his tape's really good.
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts on that. I understand having measurables and standards that you're looking for, Greg. But like in my mind, right, the idea that a guy could be 32 and 7/8 and that's not good enough, but if he's 33, that's
right.
just silly, right?
That's
That's just comical. So I think that there are certain standards you'd like, but I think especially when he's that close, if he had 31-inch arms, we could have a different conversation. But especially when it's that close to the number you're looking for, I think it's a little bit overblown. The thing I tell people is this is how long his arms have always been. You know what I mean? Like, this is how long his arms have been the last 3 years.
And he talked about that at the combine, and he probably has spoken about it again since. He said, hey, this is what I am. This is the way I play. I really haven't had a problem. And for the most part, he hasn't. I mean, his tape, I hate to use the word consistent. It's one of those scouting words that means nothing, like instincts. It's just one of those words people throw around. But this guy, snap after snap after snap, with very, very few exceptions, Ross, is really a strong executor. I mean, he's just, he's just a really good player on tape.
What about Membou from Missouri? He got a lot of buzz after his combine performance where he's got really long arms and he ran really fast. Armand Membou from Missouri, Greg.
I did him last summer, and I knew nothing about him, zero. And I really, really liked him. It's funny because last summer, and I don't think this is going to happen, and like I said, I could well be wrong. He's 6'4.5", 332. I kind of looked at him last summer, and I thought that he's a really, really good offensive guard prospect. But I think given the way he's being spoken about, he'll be a tackle. I think there's much to like about his tape. He's got a really powerful build. He's got natural strength and power. He's got heavy hands. He's another guy that there was just a consistency of fundamental execution in both pass pro and run blocking. Again, I think he's going to be seen as a tackle. I finished up in my transition, Ross, and here's what I said. I said, is there a comparison to be made with Elijah Vera Tucker coming out of USC? So that's the way I saw him, and we know he played tackle at USC and has moved inside to guard in the NFL. So I don't know if others see him the same way as I do, but that's kind of the way I saw him.
Physically, who he reminds me of, Greg, it's Jason Peters.
Interesting.
Jason Peters was 6'4", 335, longer arms, super athletic as a former tight end.
Yep.
When I watched Membou's body type and watched him at the combine, that was sort of the tackle comparison to me, because maybe not the height you typically think, but actually, if you can have the 33.5-inch arms but still be 6'4", that helps a lot.
Yep.
with power, and when people try to anchor you, because you're not 6'6", you're not 6'7", you have a lower center of gravity. So
yeah, his athletic testing was really good too, for whatever that means. But I know it does.
That's
mean
why
something.
that's why I thought of Jason Peters. You know what I mean? Like a total freak of nature at that position. Greg, phenomenal stuff as always. You know what? Give me one more O-lineman. Give me one more O-lineman. It can be Banks from Texas or Gray Zabel, North Dakota State. Maybe it's one of the big guards, Tate Ratledge or Tyler Booker.
Well,
give me one more O-lineman.
The guy that's really interesting is Gray Zabel, and he'll be this year's Graham Barton. He played left tackle at North Dakota State. He'll move inside. Now, he does have shorter arms, but you watch him, and you can tell that it's probably a combination of him and coaching, but he is such a fundamentally sound player, Ross. I mean, he does everything right. Now, obviously, the level of competition, but he will move inside. I don't know whether teams see him as a guard or a center. It's very possible he could be evaluated as a center, just like Graham Barton, who became a starter year one for the Bucs after playing left tackle at Duke. But this kid, you just watch him and you go, God, this guy just takes to coaching. He does everything right. Everything looks good. And so he's a fascinating guy.
Check him out on social media at Greg Cosell. Next week, we will dive into the D-line, maybe linebacker. I got to figure out the math here on when the draft is. Greg, you're the man. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ross. Appreciate it.
Greg, I love the Game Time app. I was actually checking out what the prices are for the Final Four. You can get into the Final Four this weekend. Florida, Auburn, Duke, Houston for $280. Now, if you want to be down closer to the court, I'm seeing the one Game Time pick. You could be pretty close to the court for $1,000. Some of them are way more expensive than that, but I love the curation that makes it easier to find better value for tickets, not just to sports, but concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code ROSS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So again, create an account and redeem code ROSS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, all in pricing, lowest price guaranteed. Got a picture from a buddy over the weekend that was drinking Labatt, and I literally said to him, go to rewards.labattusa.com. Why not? It's called Buy Beer, Get Gear. I was rocking the Labatt hat quite a bit over the last couple weeks when I was out west skiing. It's so easy. Just go to the website, snap a photo of your receipt, upload it instantly to rack up points for exclusive merch. Buy beer, get gear. Go to rewards.labattusa.com to sign up.
Tuck's Takes.
All right, Ross, the Ravens, they gave head coach John Harbaugh a 3-year extension, which locks him in Baltimore through the 2028 season.
He deserves it. He's a good coach. He's had a lot of success there. They have not been able to get over the hump during the Lamar Jackson era in terms of getting to the Super Bowl, but welcome to the party. Neither of the Bills with Josh Allen, and obviously the Bills just gave him a big extension. He's a good coach. He's a proven commodity. Don't mess with something that's not broken.
The Bills, they pay another one of their own, signing quarterback Christian Benford to a monster contract extension.
Right. And you know what I thought was interesting about that? A couple things here. First of all, remember, okay, he came in the same draft as Kaiir Elam, okay? And I think Benford was a 6th-round pick out of Villanova, and Elam was a 1st-round pick out of Florida. And I give the Bills a lot of credit. They identified pretty early, might have been first game rookie year, that Benford was better. Benford was further along, and that never really changed. And they have him now locked up for a long haul. They've done a lot of work this offseason to try to use the money they have to lock up their core players that they think are going to be part of this run over the next 3 or 4 years. Interestingly, Brandon Beane said recently they're not as close with James Cook because of what James was looking for. They kind of pivoted and gone elsewhere. So you have to be careful about that if you're a player. Now, maybe James Cook thinks he'll get that from someone else next year, but you got to be careful about that.
There are several other signings across the league, including the Eagles bringing in Kendall Lamb and Matt Pryor, Giants with Zach Pascal, Jets with Josh Reynolds, Ravens signed Chidobe Awuzie, Titans bringing quarterback Tim Boyle, and Texans signed linebacker E.J. Speed, and Patriots cut Juwan Bentley.
Patriots are cutting like every guy, I feel like, that's back from the Belichick era, which is interesting. And then the Awuzie, what an amazing signing by the Ravens. He's guaranteed $7.5 million from the Titans. So they're getting them for the minimum, which is like a classic Ravens move. So I had a couple of vodka drinks Saturday night. Absolutely delicious, thanks to my friends at Smirnoff. The perfect vodka for crafting delicious cocktails that are easy to make and versatile for any and all fans over 21. Remember, they are official sponsors of the NFL. They're official sponsor of this podcast. The first one was Smirnoff and like some banana stuff. That was good. And then the second one had kind of a cinnamon flavor to it. It is fun to try different Smirnoff crafted cocktails. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff number 21 vodka, distilled from grain, 40% alcohol by volume. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. Please do not share with anyone under legal drinking age. The draft will be here in, 3 weeks at this point? Make Smirnoff your number one vodka pick. Other than that, I think we're done here.
Thanks for tuning in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also check out Even Money, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network on Samsung TV Plus, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
Shout out myfrontpagestory.com. Hey, Mother's Day will be here before you know it. And also, it's just the best gift for anything. A birthday, an anniversary. I can't highly recommend it enough. And as a reminder, if you ever purchase a My Front Page Story for anyone in your life, I guarantee you I will send you a signed autograph in the mail, which is kind of cool. You're locking it in. You're locking in a great gift for someone, and you're locking in being able to go ahead and get something signed from your boy. BackOfficeScheduler.com, HumanHeadNYC.com, Sporticulture, Pizza Boy Brewing.